Welcome back to Eagle Eye Apache. Today, I want to share with you a story about a night colder than memory. A night when fate itself seemed to ride the wind. On a frozen ridge of the Sacramento Mountains, the snow lay heavy, and the air cut sharp as broken glass. Nathaniel Greyhawk, an Apache widower who had chosen silence over society, tended the fire in his lonely cabin. For years, he had lived without need of company, his days filled with hunting, carving, and listening to the whispers of wind through pine. Men had betrayed him. Soldiers had tried to break him. Settlers had taught him distrust. His only companions were memory and dream. And yet, that night, a sound broke the silence. A faint knock, hesitant, almost trembling, echoed against the wooden door. Nathaniel froze. Few souls ever climbed so high into these mountains, and fewer still arrived after nightfall. He reached for the Winchester resting near the hearth, his fingers brushing the stock out of instinct. Another knock came, weaker this time, as though the one outside was nearly spent. Nathaniel's life had taught him to be cautious. He had seen bounty hunters at his door, soldiers in the dark, men who would take his life for the color of his skin. But this knock was different, fragile, like a bird's wing brushing wood. Against the weight of caution, he rose and pulled back the bar. The door creaked open, and there she stood, Clara Whitfield, a young woman no older than her mid-20s. Her clothes ragged, torn at the seams, dusted with frost and blood. Her hair, once golden, hung in snarled strands. Her cheeks were raw with windburn, her lips split, her eyes wide with exhaustion. She looked half ghost, half fighter. Her voice cracked as she tried to speak. "I only need scraps, maybe a corner of your porch for the night." The words wavered, but her stance did not. She clutched her arms around herself, not in fear, but in sheer determination to remain standing. Nathaniel's instinct urged him to close the door, to protect the solitude that had kept him safe. But another voice stirred within him, the echo of dreams he had carried for months. In those dreams, a woman had stood by a river, calling his name. He had dismissed it as loneliness. But now, looking at her eyes pale, steady even in desperation, he felt the weight of something more. "You'll freeze out here," he said at last, his voice flat, guarded. "I've been walking since dawn," she whispered. "I don't need kindness. Just let me rest." For a long moment, silence stretched between them, the snow swirling in the gap like ash from a dying fire. Then Nathaniel stepped aside. "Come in." Clara blinked, startled, as if she had not expected mercy. Slowly, stiffly, she crossed the threshold. The warmth of the fire struck her face, and she swayed, steadying herself against the wall. Nathaniel closed the door and set the bar again. "Sit," he said simply, motioning toward the bench near the fire. She obeyed, lowering herself like a soldier receiving orders. He placed a bowl of venison stew before her. She ate without speaking, her hands trembling, the spoon clattering against the rim. When the bowl was empty, she leaned back, her breathing ragged, her eyes closed, as if she had outrun death itself. Nathaniel studied her quietly. He saw the dirt caked beneath her nails, the faint bruises circling her wrists, the smell of captivity that clung to her. His jaw tightened. He had seen such cruelty before. Women tricked, stolen, sold. "There's a washroom out back," he said finally. "The pump runs cold. But you'll rest easier, clean." Clara looked at him, startled again. For a moment, gratitude flickered in her tired eyes, though she only nodded. She rose unsteadily and disappeared into the dark. When she returned, her hair damp, her face bare of grime, Nathaniel felt his chest tighten. In the glow of firelight, her features came clear, the determined line of her mouth, the sorrow written in her eyes, the unmistakable strength hidden beneath suffering. And he knew those eyes, not from town, not from memory, but from his dreams. She caught his gaze and frowned. "What is it?" Nathaniel forced himself to look away. "Nothing." She drew the blanket tighter around her shoulders, as if it could protect her from more than cold. "My name's Clara," she said softly. "I was taken. They told me it was work. Good work. But it was a trap. A month. Maybe longer, I lost count. I ran yesterday. I thought I would die out there in the snow." Her voice broke, but she steadied it again. "I only want to get home. My mother was ill before I left. She'll be worried sick." Nathaniel listened, his face hard, though inside his heart ached. He knew too well the cruelty of men who profited on weakness. He had buried children, buried trust, buried too many of his people under the weight of the white man's hunger. "You'll stay the night," he said simply. "Leave at first light." Clara nodded, curling up on the bench as though even hard wood felt like a feather bed compared to the ground she had fled. Soon her breathing slowed, drifting into a restless sleep. Nathaniel lay awake on his cot, staring into the dying flames. The woman's words lingered, her face lingered, and when he closed his eyes, the dream came again. He was standing by the river, moonlight silver on the water. His mother's spirit appeared, hair long, eyes gentle. She raised her hand toward the cabin. "She is the one," she said in Apache. "The one you saw in visions. The good woman. You must not let her walk alone." Nathaniel's throat tightened. "Why her?" His mother smiled faintly. "Because she carries sorrow, and you carry strength. Together, you may yet find peace." The dream faded, but the words burned bright. When dawn came, Clara gathered her torn shoes and whispered, "I won't trouble you further." But Nathaniel's resolve had already hardened. Slinging his rifle across his back, he said quietly, "I have business near town. I'll walk with you." And though he spoke of business, deep in his chest he knew the truth. This was no errand. This was the path his mother had shown him. The path that began with a knock at midnight. The night outside deepened, pressing against the windows like a living thing. Inside, the fire burned low, throwing soft light across the cabin walls. Clara slept curled beneath a wool blanket, her body shivering even in warmth, her breath shallow and uneven. Nathaniel sat by the embers, carving a piece of cedar, his hands steady, his mind restless. He had known silence for years, but this silence felt different. It carried another heartbeat. When dawn broke, pale and weak, he heard her stir. She rose slowly, disoriented at first, then remembered where she was. The light caught the faint bruises around her wrists, marks like dark rings that no soap could wash away. Nathaniel saw them as she tried to pull her sleeves down. Ashamed, he said nothing, but the muscles in his jaw flexed once hard. Silent fury. He stepped outside to fetch water from the stream. The cold bit into his skin, but it helped steady the ache in his chest. When he returned, Clara had folded her blanket neatly and stood near the door, her shoes tied, her hair still damp from the wash. "You didn't have to stay awake," she murmured. He placed the bucket by the fire. "I don't sleep easy." Her eyes drifted toward the carving in his hands. It was half-finished, an eagle mid-flight, wings outstretched. "That's beautiful," she said quietly. "For someone who doesn't trust people. You keep a gentle home." He glanced at her. "Gentle doesn't mean safe." A pause lingered. The only sound was the pop of burning pine. Then Clara said, "They told me it was a sewing job. In the city, good pay. A month's work. Maybe 2. I believed them." Her voice trembled. But she didn't stop. "They locked us in a wagon. Took our papers. Our names. Some didn't come back from that place. I ran when I saw my chance." Nathaniel didn't move. Didn't speak. He had no words that could make her story smaller or softer. His own people had been tricked, hunted, chained. Her pain spoke a language he already knew. She turned to him suddenly, eyes fierce beneath exhaustion. "You look at me like you pity me. Don't." He met her gaze without flinching. "Pity's a wound I don't carry." "Good," she said, squaring her shoulders. "Because I don't need kindness. I need to keep walking." Her voice had steel now, thin but unbending. For the first time, Nathaniel saw the fire behind the bruises, the survivor beneath the fear. It stirred something long buried inside him, the part of him that once believed courage was contagious. "You can walk," he said evenly. "But not today. The trail's iced over, and wolves follow scent. Rest. Eat again. Leave when the sun's high." Clara looked as though she might argue, then nodded once. "Just until noon." He handed her a piece of bread and dried venison. She ate quietly, staring at the window where the light fell on the frost. After a while, she spoke again, her tone softer now. "You live here alone. I prefer it that way." "Why?" He hesitated, then said, "Because people don't leave things untouched. They take what isn't theirs: land, peace, names. Solitude is what's left." Clara studied him, and for the first time, she didn't look afraid. "Maybe that's why I came here," she whispered. "Because I was taken too. And I just wanted one place that felt untouched." Nathaniel looked away. He hadn't expected her to understand, much less mirror the shape of his own silence. Hours passed slowly. The storm eased. From time to time, Clara dozed by the fire. Nathaniel repaired a snare line, split wood, anything to keep his hands moving. Yet his thoughts kept circling back to her, how she had thanked him without words, how she refused to be pitied, how she carried pain like armor. As the sun climbed, he found himself outside again, staring toward the distant trail that led down the mountain. He knew she'd try to walk it soon. He also knew what waited beyond the men who made a living off the suffering of others, and the kind of justice that never reached women like her. Behind him, the cabin door creaked open. "I should go," Clara said. Her face looked calmer, but her eyes still flickered with unease. "You've done enough." Nathaniel turned, studying her. "You know the land below?" She hesitated. "No, but I'll find my way." He shook his head slowly. "The ones who took you, they'll be looking. They don't let go easy. I can't hide forever." "No," he said quietly. But you can live long enough to fight back. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Clara's eyes softened, the hard edges of her fear giving way to something else. Trust, small and trembling, but real. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. Nathaniel's gaze drifted to the stream outside, glittering beneath thin sunlight. "Because once, someone helped me when I didn't think I deserved it." The wind outside shifted, whistling low through the pines. Clara drew her shawl tighter. "Then I'll walk when the light's higher," she said. He nodded. "Good." For the first time that morning, a flicker of warmth crossed her face. Not a smile. Exactly. But something close. She reached for the door, pausing to look back at him. "Thank you, Nathaniel." He inclined his head. "You'll need strength more than thanks." When she stepped outside, the sunlight broke through the clouds, spilling gold across the frozen ground. Nathaniel watched her stand there, breathing it in, as though trying to remember what warmth felt like. Inside the cabin, the fire hissed softly, its smoke curling toward the rafters. Nathaniel sat again, the half-carved eagle in his hand. He traced the curve of its wing with his thumb and whispered to the empty room, "Maybe this time, the wind brings someone meant to stay." And in the hush that followed, the mountains held their breath, two souls, each scarred by loss. Bound now by the fragile thread of fate, neither had chosen, but both would soon have to follow. That night, the wind rose again, whispering through the trees like a language half forgotten. Nathaniel lay on his cot, eyes open to the darkness, the low fire painting shadows across the cabin walls. Sleep came slow, heavy as snow on a branch. And when it finally took him, it carried him back, not to the world of men, but to the place between. He stood on the riverbank, silver moonlight spilling over black water. The air smelled of sage and smoke. From the mist came a shape, his mother, tall and gentle, her braid glimmering with beads. He remembered from childhood. Her eyes were kind, yet filled with knowing. "My son," she said in Apache, her voice soft as wind through pine needles. "You walk alone too long." He bowed his head. "It is safer that way." "Safe is not the same as living," she whispered. Then she turned her gaze toward the cabin that shimmered behind him like a memory. Inside, he saw the faint outline of a woman sitting by the fire. Clara, her face half in shadow. "She is the one," his mother said. "Do not let her walk alone." Nathaniel's throat tightened. "Why her?" His mother's smile was small, sorrowful. "Because she carries sorrow, and you carry strength. Together, perhaps, you may carry peace." The wind shifted, scattering her voice across the river. He reached for her, but she faded like smoke. The dream dissolved into the sound of distant knocking, the same faint echo that had once brought Clara to his door. Nathaniel woke with a start. The fire had burned down to embers, and pale light crept through the shutters. For a moment, he didn't move. He only listened to the stillness, to his heartbeat, to the echo of his mother's words that lingered like prayer. "She is the one." He rose quietly and added wood to the fire. Outside, the sky had begun to pale, streaked with cold dawn. He stepped out to the porch, the chill biting his skin. The mountains loomed silent and endless, their ridges carved in shadow and frost. Somewhere beyond those peaks lay her path, and perhaps his. When he returned inside, Clara was already awake, sitting near the door with her bundle tied. Her eyes were clearer this morning, though ringed with sleeplessness. "I'm grateful," she said softly, "but I can't stay. My mother's waiting. And if she's still alive, she needs me." Nathaniel nodded, though her words tugged at something deep inside him. "You'll need to follow the trail east," he said. "But the snow's heavy there. Travel slow. I've walked through worse." Her voice was calm, but he heard the tremor beneath it, the fear she refused to name. He poured her a cup of coffee, the steam rising between them. "You sure you want to go alone?" She looked up, meeting his gaze squarely. "I've been alone since the day they took me." Nathaniel said nothing. He understood too well that kind of sentence, the kind that held 1,000 unspoken miles inside it. When she finished the cup, she stood and adjusted her shawl. "You've been kind, Mr. Greyhawk, more than most would be. But this is my road." Nathaniel moved to the door before she could open it. "Then I'll walk part of it with you." She blinked, surprised. "You don't have to sew." He shrugged. "I've business near town." "Business?" she asked, arching a brow. He didn't answer. The lie hung in the air, quiet but deliberate. He would not tell her that a dream had spoken louder than reason. Outside, the morning sun broke weakly over the ridges. The snow gleamed like crushed glass. Clara stepped into it, her boots leaving shallow prints. Nathaniel followed a few paces behind, rifle slung across his shoulder. They moved through the stillness of the mountain, their breaths clouding in the cold air. The forest around them was a cathedral of frost and silence. Ravens called from distant pines. Every sound felt sharper, closer, each crunch of snow beneath their boots like a heartbeat. For a time, neither spoke. The quiet between them was not empty, but heavy with thought. Then Clara said, "You don't talk much. Words don't warm a man." Nathaniel replied, "Sometimes they do." She murmured, "When they're the right ones." He glanced at her, catching the faint smile on her lips. There was something brave in the way she faced the cold, the way she refused to shrink from pain. She walked like someone who had already survived the worst the world could offer and dared it to try again. Hours passed. The trail wound downward through the timberline, where snow gave way to rock and earth. Clara paused once, resting her hand against a pine trunk. "It's strange," she said softly. "The air smells freer here, like something waiting to be forgiven." Nathaniel studied her. "The land remembers everything," he said. "Blood, kindness, lies, it keeps them all. Then maybe it'll remember us kindly," she replied, eyes on the horizon. He didn't answer, but his chest tightened at the thought. As the sun climbed, light spilled across the valley ahead, a long stretch of white leading toward the faint blur of distant smoke. Beyond that lay towns, men, danger, yet walking beside her. Nathaniel felt a stirring he had known in years, purpose. She turned to him once more. "You really don't have to come." "I know," he said quietly, "but I'm coming anyway." Something in his tone silenced her. For a few moments, they simply stood there, the wind tugging at their clothes, the sun glinting off snow like broken glass. Then Clara nodded. "All right. But when we reach town, you go your way, and I go mine." Nathaniel looked toward the horizon. "We'll see what the river decides." And with that, they continued on, two strangers, bound by loss and something neither yet understood. The mountains watched them go, tall, and patient, as though they had seen this path walked before many times, by souls fated to meet where sorrow meets strength. Ahead lay miles of frozen trail. Behind them, the cabin, the solitude, the safety of silence. And between those two worlds, a promise neither had spoken aloud, but both had already begun to keep. By afternoon, the sky began to turn the color of pewter. Clouds gathered low over the ridges, and the light dimmed to a tired gray. The trail led them out of the forest and down into a wide valley where the snow thinned and the wind softened. There, Clara whispered, pointing ahead. A small farmhouse sat at the edge of the clearing, lean, crooked, its roof bowed under years of weather. Smoke did not rise from the chimney. The windows were dull and lifeless, their shutters flapping against the boards with each gust of wind. Her steps quickened. Nathaniel followed in silence, his eyes scanning the ground. The empty corral, the gate half hanging from its hinge. Something in the stillness pressed heavy against the air, like the world itself was holding its breath. Clara hurried to the porch, her boots crunching through the frost. "Mama," she called, her voice sharp and trembling. "It's me, I'm home." The only answer was the wind moving through the bare branches. She pushed the door open. It gave way easily. No lock, no resistance, just the dry creak of old wood. Inside, the air was cold, untouched for weeks. Dust floated in the dim light, soft as ash. The hearth was dead. A single shawl, half knitted, lay folded on the rocking chair, as if waiting for hands that would never return. Clara froze in the doorway. "Mama," she said again, smaller this time, her voice breaking like ice underfoot. She moved from room to room, the kitchen, the small bedroom, each one colder, emptier, echoing with silence. When she reached the last room, her knees gave way. She sank to the floor beside the rocker, clutching the half-finished shawl to her chest. The yarn smelled faintly of lavender, faintly of her mother's touch. Her shoulders shook, her breath ragged and uneven. Nathaniel lingered at the threshold, hat in hand. He had seen death before too many times. Too many mothers left waiting for sons who never came home. But something about this moment, this daughter returning too late, cut deeper than he expected. He stepped inside quietly and crouched beside her. She did not look up. Her sobs came low and broken, the sound of a heart folding in on itself. He said nothing. Words would have been an insult. Instead, he placed a hand on her shoulder, steady, solid. No pity, no intrusion, only presence. The warmth of that small gesture seemed to pull her back from the edge. She turned her face toward him, eyes red and raw. "She waited for me," she whispered. "I know she did. Every day, every night. And I never came." Nathaniel's voice was low, rough as stone. "Blame is a knife. Turn it on yourself, and it only cuts deeper." She clutched the shawl tighter. "How do you know?" He looked at the cold hearth. "Because I've bled enough." Silence filled the room again. But it was different now, shared. The kind of silence that binds instead of separates. After a long while, Clara rose unsteadily. She moved through the small house, touching the worn table, the framed picture on the wall, the chipped teacup by the sink. Each item was a memory waiting to be spoken. But she couldn't find the words. Nathaniel gathered kindling from the porch and rekindled the fire. The flames rose weakly at first, then grew, spreading light through the house once more. Clara stood beside him, watching. She always said warmth makes the world less cruel, she murmured. He nodded. Then we'll keep it burning. As dusk fell, of the neighbor, a gray-haired woman from the next valley appeared at the door, clutching her shawl. When she saw Clara, her eyes filled with pity and relief all at once. Child, the woman said softly. We prayed you were alive. Clara's lips trembled. Where's my mother? The neighbor hesitated, twisting her hands. She passed. Dear, a week after you disappeared. The worry took her heart. The words landed like stones. Clara's breath hitched. She sank back into the chair, pressing her mother's shawl against her face. A sound came from her half-sob, half-prayer, the kind that empties a soul. Nathaniel turned away, giving her space. He stood by the window, watching the sun fall behind the mountains, the last light fading from the snow. After the neighbor left, silence returned, heavier than before. The fire crackled softly. Clara sat near it, eyes hollow, hands trembling as she smoothed the yarn of the shawl. Finally, she spoke, her voice a whisper. She died thinking I'd been lost. And she was right. Nathaniel shook his head. You were stolen. There's a difference. She looked up at him, tears glinting in the firelight. Either way, I wasn't here. And now she's gone. He crouched in front of her, meeting her gaze. Then live in a way that gives her peace. Not more sorrow. Clara blinked, as if the thought had never crossed her mind. Peace, she repeated softly. The word felt foreign on her tongue. For a long time, she stared into the flames. The anger beneath her grief began to stir a small ember, faint but alive. When she finally spoke again, her voice carried a new edge. Those men who took me, they're still out there, doing to others what they did to me. She looked up, her expression hardening. Someone has to stop them. Nathaniel held her gaze. He saw the shift in her eyes the moment sorrow began to turn into purpose. You are tired, he said. Wounded. This isn't your fight. It is now, she answered. They stole me. They killed her in their way. If I walk away, then it all meant nothing. He studied her for a long time, the firelight flickering across his face. He remembered the dream, the river, his mother's voice, the promise. She is the one. The spirit had said. Nathaniel exhaled slowly. Then you won't walk that road alone. Clara's lips parted in surprise. For the first time since she stepped into the house, her eyes softened, the faintest glimmer of hope returning to her face. Thank you, she whispered. Nathaniel turned back to the fire. Don't thank me yet, he said quietly. The hardest part's still ahead. Outside, the wind carried the last light of day across the valley, sweeping over the roof and the fields that had once been her mother's. Inside, grief had taken root, and with it, something fierce and new, a purpose, the kind that could turn sorrow into justice. Morning came gray and thin. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed in pale light and silence. Snow clung to the eaves. The fields lay bare and hollow, and smoke from the hearth curled lazily into the cold sky. Clara sat near the window, her mother's shawl draped across her shoulders. It no longer felt like warmth. It felt like a promise. The tears had dried, but something sharper remained behind her eyes, the kind of ache that no crying could ease. Nathaniel moved quietly through the cabin, setting kindling, boiling water, tending to the simple tasks that kept grief from devouring the morning. He had buried many losses in his life, but he knew the sound of someone who was not done grieving. Not yet. For a long time, neither spoke. Then Clara broke the silence. Her voice was low, but steady. "They took me," she said, her gaze fixed on the snow outside. "They tricked others too. I wasn't the first." Nathaniel turned. She was no longer trembling. The fear had burned off, leaving behind something leaner, harder. "They'll do it again," she said. "To more women. To more mothers waiting by empty windows." Nathaniel studied her quietly. "You retired. Your wounds haven't healed. I don't care." She turned to him, fire in her voice. "They stole me. Nathaniel, they broke my mother's heart. If I stay silent, it all meant nothing." He held her gaze, calm but unyielding. "The men who took you are dangerous. They travel in groups, armed, paid by traders who think souls are property. I know what they are," she said. "I saw their faces every night. I closed my eyes." Nathaniel exhaled slowly, running a thumb along the edge of his knife. "Revenge is a fire that burns the hand holding it." Clara rose, the shawl falling from her shoulders. "Then let it burn," she said. "I'm already ash." The words hung in the air, heavy as the mountain snow. Nathaniel looked at her, truly looked, and saw not the frightened girl who had stumbled to his door, but a woman tempered by suffering. Her pain had become purpose. He set down his knife, then picked up a small block of cedar from the shelf. Without a word, he began to carve. The rhythm of the blade against wood was steady, almost meditative. Clara watched, curiosity softening her anger for a moment. "What are you making?" He didn't answer right away. He shaped the wings first. Careful, deliberate, the shavings falling like snow around his boots. Then he carved the curve of the head, the tiny beak, the feathered tail. When it was done, he brushed the dust away and handed it to her. A small wooden sparrow. She held it in her palm, surprised by how light it felt. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Nathaniel nodded once. "Even a sparrow fights when its nest is threatened." She turned the carving over in her hand, tracing the grooves of its wings. "You think I can fight? I think you already are." For a long moment, their eyes held. Something passed between them, not romance, not yet, but the quiet recognition of two souls who understood the other's scars. Clara smiled faintly. "Then I'll fight. Not out of hate, out of love, for her." Nathaniel leaned back, his gaze steady. "Then I'll walk beside you, to keep that fire from turning wild." She tilted her head. "Why would you do that?" He looked toward the mountains, the wind stirring the smoke. "Because I've seen what happens when good men stay silent. And because a dream told me not to let you walk alone." Her brow furrowed. "A dream," he gave a small, almost shy nod. "My mother's spirit." She spoke of a woman who carried sorrow. Said I'd know her when I saw her. Clara's voice softened. "And you think that's me, I don't think," he said. "I know." She looked down at the sparrow again, feeling the weight of his words. Then she tucked it carefully into her pocket, close to her heart. Outside, the wind rose, sweeping across the valley. The snow that had once buried the fields now glittered under a weak sun, each flake catching the light like glass. As the hours passed, they worked side by side without speaking. Nathaniel fixed the door hinge and stacked wood. Clara sorted through her mother's things, keeping what mattered, burning what didn't. The rhythm of it was healing, in its own way a ritual of moving forward. That evening, when the fire burned bright again, Clara sat on the floor beside it, the carved sparrow in her hand. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked quietly. "Miss what?" "The noise. The world. People." Nathaniel considered this. "Sometimes. But noise is easy. Peace takes work." She nodded slowly. "Maybe I'm tired of silence." He looked at her, the flames reflecting in his eyes. "Then make something louder than grief." She smiled faintly. "Like justice. Justice is the only song worth raising," he said. Outside, the night deepened, the stars sharp and cold, above the valley. Inside, the light from the fire bathed them both in warmth. Clara leaned forward, her voice quiet. "I was afraid when I first knocked on your door. I thought you'd turn me away. You almost made me." He admitted. "But the wind carries whispers. Sometimes it brings what a man doesn't know he needs." Their eyes met again, no words. Just a silence that felt alive. The slow burn between them flickered small, fragile, but unmistakable. Clara reached for the shawl on the chair and draped it around her shoulders once more. "Tomorrow," she said, her voice firm, "we start finding them." Nathaniel nodded. "Then we'll need proof before blood." Her lips curved into a thin, determined smile. "Then we'll find proof. And if that fails, blood will do." Nathaniel watched her, half in admiration, half in fear for what she was becoming. But deep down, he knew this was her way through grief, not around it, but through. He stirred the fire one last time, and as sparks rose up the chimney, he whispered a prayer in Apache for guidance, for strength, and for the woman who had turned his silence into something fierce. The mountains outside stood tall and watchful, the sky black and wide, and somewhere in that stillness, the first ember of justice began to glow, born from pain, carried by courage, and fanned by the quiet breath of two souls who had finally found something worth fighting for. The next morning broke clear and sharp, the kind of winter light that hides nothing. Snow glittered on the fields like broken glass. Clara stepped out of the cabin, her breath steaming in the air. The carved sparrow clutched tight in her hand. Nathaniel was already waiting by the gate, rifle slung, eyes fixed on the long trail that wound toward the valley. They didn't speak much as they walked. The road itself seemed to hold its breath. The hush of frost beneath their boots, punctuated only by the caw of distant crows. Each step carried them closer to the world Clara had fled, and to the men who believed her silence would last forever. By noon they reached the edge of town. It looked small from the ridge, a handful of rooftops huddled against the snow, smoke drifting thinly from a few chimneys. Yet beneath that ordinary quiet, corruption simmered like tar under ice. In the heart of the valley stood an abandoned freight office, its windows boarded, roof half collapsed. Clara hesitated before its door. "This is where they brought us first," she said softly. "Where they kept us before the wagons moved south." Nathaniel studied the building, eyes narrowed. "Then it's where we start." Inside, the air smelled of ashes and mold. They picked their way through broken crates and scraps of paper, charred black. Nathaniel stirred the ashes with his boot, and something pale caught the light. He knelt, brushing away soot to reveal the edge of a book half burned. Pages curled, but still legible. Clara crouched beside him, Together they pried it from the debris. Names filled the remaining pages in a hurried scrawl, women's names, each followed by a date and a destination. Beside some, a single line had been drawn through in thick ink. Her hand shook as she traced the first entry. These are the others. Nathaniel's expression darkened. Ledger of trade, he said grimly. He wrote them down like cattle. Clara's breath hitched. Then now we have proof. He shook his head. Not enough. Men like Gideon Carrick buy silence as easy as horses. They'll call this paper a lie before they see it as truth. The name struck her. Carrick, she whispered. I remember him. He wore a fine coat. Silver buttons. Said we were being sent to work. That everything would be decent. Her jaw tightened. He smiled when he locked the door. Nathaniel tucked the damaged ledger into his coat. Then, he'll smile no more. They left the ruins and walked toward the town square. The streets looked ordinary, shopkeepers sweeping snow. Women hanging laundry, but whispers followed them like shadows. People looked away when they passed. Some in fear, others in guilt. Near the post office, two men stood talking in low tones, the sheriff and one of his deputies. Nathaniel caught fragments of their words. Carrick. Payment. South Run. His eyes met Clara's. She had heard it too. The law's bought, he said under his breath. Then we'll find law that isn't. She replied. At the end of Main Street stood the church. Small and weather-worn, its steeple leaning like a tired sentinel. Clara hesitated before the door. The Reverend knew my mother, she murmured. If anyone will listen, it's him. Inside, the air was cool and still. Reverend Alden, a thin man with gray in his beard and eyes that had seen too much, looked up as they entered. Recognition flickered. Clara Whitfield, mercy above. We thought you were gone. I almost was, she said simply. But others still are. They laid the half-burned ledger on his desk. As the Reverend turned the pages, his face went pale. Names, he whispered. So many I've heard rumors for years, but nothing this clear. Nathaniel spoke quietly. Your sheriff takes coin from Carrick. You'll find no justice through him. The Reverend's hands trembled. You're accusing powerful men, Mr. Greyhawk. The town fears them. Fears what keeps them powerful. Nathaniel said. Clara's voice cut through the hush. Reverend, my mother died waiting for me. These women, these daughters, someone's still waiting for them. You can't pray that kind of pain away. You have to fight it. For a moment, Alden only stared at her. Then something shifted in his eyes, a flicker of resolve, long dormant. You rewrite, he said quietly. I can't stand idle. That night, he gathered a handful of townsfolk in the church basement, a blacksmith, two ranchers, the mother of another missing girl. They came hesitantly, faces lined with fear and grief. Clara told them what she had seen: the wagons, the locked rooms, the lies. She held up the ledger with shaking hands. This isn't just names, she said. It's lives. And if we don't stop them, the list will keep growing. Her words struck like a hammer. The blacksmith slammed his fist on the table. My niece vanished last spring, he said. If this man took her, he'll answer for it. Others nodded, murmuring prayers that sounded more like oaths. The air thickened with purpose. Nathaniel watched from the corner, silent but proud. The woman who had stumbled to his door half-frozen was gone. In her place stood a force trembling. Human. but fierce. When the meeting ended, Clara stepped outside into the cold night. The town lay dark. The wind carrying faint echoes of voices and the creak of wagons from the freight yard below. She looked toward it, her breath sharp in the air. "He's still out there," she said. Nathaniel stood beside her, the ledger under his arm. "Then so are we." For the first time in weeks, she smiled, not out of happiness, but out of defiance. "Tomorrow we start gathering the rest. Proof, not rumor. Truth they can't burn." Nathaniel nodded. "And when we have it," her eyes glinted in the moonlight, "then we show the town what monsters look like in daylight." The wind carried her words down the street, scattering them through the darkened town like seeds waiting to take root. Somewhere, behind closed shutters, mothers prayed and daughters dreamed. And in that small church on the hill, a handful of people dared to hope again. For the first time since her captivity, Clara felt the weight in her chest shift, not gone, but lighter. The grief that had broken her had become a weapon, sharpened by truth. And beside her, Nathaniel felt his mother's words whisper through his memory once more. "She is the one. Do not let her walk alone." He turned toward Clara, his voice low. "Whatever comes next, we walk it together." She nodded, eyes fixed on the dark horizon where justice waited. "Together," she said. The night deepened, stars burning cold above the valley. And from the ashes of loss, the first light of rebellion began to rise. Dawn crept slow over the valley, a pale gold bleeding into the snow. The mountains stood silent, ancient witnesses to what was about to come. Nathaniel tightened the cinch on his horse's saddle, while Clara checked the pistol Reverend Alden had given her the night before. Around them, the small band gathered: 2 ranchers, the blacksmith, the grieving mother, and the Reverend himself. Ordinary folk, bound by one thing, the decision to stop being afraid. No one spoke much. Words felt fragile in the cold. When the first light touched the ridge, Nathaniel gave a nod, and the group began to ride. Hooves crunched through frost, breath steaming in the air. The wind carried no sound but their resolve. By mid-morning, they reached the canyon, a scar in the earth where rock and shadow met. Below, tucked against the cliffs, lay the hidden freight depot. Smoke rose from its chimneys. Wagons stood lined in rows, their canvas covers drawn tight. Men lounged near the corral, rifles across their knees, laughter harsh against the stillness. Clara's breath caught. "That's it," she whispered. "That's where they kept us." Nathaniel scanned the yard, counting heads. 12 men, maybe more inside. The blacksmith spat into the dirt. 12 too many. They dismounted and crept down the ridge. The air smelled of tar, sweat, and fear. At the barn door, Nathaniel paused, listening. Behind the wood came muffled cries, soft, broken voices. Clara's hands clenched. "They're in there." Nathaniel nodded once. "Then we move." The door gave way with a groan, and light spilled into the dark. Inside, half a dozen women huddled beneath blankets, wrists bound, faces pale with terror. One gasped when she saw Clara. You got away." Clara knelt beside her, cutting the ropes with trembling hands. "Not just me," she said. "All of you. You're free." The words rippled through the barn like a prayer. Tears, gasps, disbelief. The blacksmith and the ranchers helped the captives out, hiding them among the rocks with the grieving mother. for a heartbeat. It seemed they might escape unseen. Then came the thunder of hooves. From the south trail, a dozen riders stormed into the yard. Carrick's men. At their head rode Gideon Carrick himself, tall in a dark coat, silver buttons flashing, a serpent's smile curling beneath his hat brim. "Well, well," he drawled. The little bird flew home and brought company. Clara stepped into the open, the half-burned ledger in her hands. "This ends today. Carrick, the names. The lies, everyone will know what you've done." Carrick laughed, the sound low and cruel. "You think anyone cares? The law rides from me. Girl, I own this town. Not anymore." Reverend Alden called out, stepping forward. "Your sins are written, and the town will see them." Carrick's smile faded. "Then they can watch you die for them." He raised his hand, rifles lifted. The first shot cracked through the cold. Nathaniel moved without thinking, shoving Clara behind a wagon as bullets splintered the air. He returned fire clean, precise, dropping 2 riders before they reached the corral. The ranchers fired from the ridge, their shouts echoing through the canyon. Chaos, exploded smoke, dust, the scream of horses, the ring of gunfire. Through it all, Clara clutched the ledger to her chest, heart pounding. She could have hidden, but she didn't. She stepped into the open, voice ringing across the yard. "People of this town," she shouted, her words slicing through the chaos. "Here are the names of your daughters, your wives, your sisters. These are the ones he sold." Her cry carried up the canyon, where townsfolk had gathered at the noise of battle. Faces turned, eyes wide with horror and fury. Murmurs rose, then shouts. "My niece, my girl's name." There Carrick's composure shattered. "Shut her up!" he roared. 2 riders charged, but Nathaniel was already there. He met them head-on, one rifle butt to the jaw. Another man's gun ripped from his hand. Carrick drew his pistol and fired. The bullet grazed Nathaniel's shoulder, spinning him back. But he stayed upright, eyes burning with pain and purpose. Clara raised her voice again, trembling but unbroken. "This is the truth. Look at the ledger. Look at his men." The crowd poured down from the ridge farmer. Mothers, townsmen, all roaring with rage. They swarmed the yard, seizing Carrick's men, tearing the rifles from their hands. The traitor tried to flee, but strong arms caught him, dragged him down. His fine coat ripped, his silver buttons scattered in the dust. The gunfire stilled. Smoke curled above the wrecked depot, the air thick with ash and justice. Clara stood shaking, the ledger pressed against her heart. Nathaniel limped to her side, blood seeping through his shirt. "You saved them," she whispered. He shook his head. "No," he said, voice low and steady. "You did." Around them, the freed women wept. The townsfolk knelt beside them, the sound of chains breaking replaced by prayers and sobs. For the first time in years, the canyon echoed not with fear, but with freedom. And in that dawn of smoke and light, Nathaniel and Clara stood together, 2 souls scarred but unbroken, watching as a town, once silent, finally found its voice. By nightfall, the guns were silent. Smoke drifted from the ruins of the freight depot, curling into the pale winter sky. Gideon Carrick sat bound in the back of a wagon, his fine coat torn, his face stripped of arrogance. The man who once owned law and silence now had neither. His empire lay in ashes, burned by truth and the courage of those he thought too small to fight back. The townsfolk gathered in the church that evening, lanterns glowing like a field of stars beneath the roof. Reverend Alden stood at the pulpit, reading aloud the names from the half-burned ledger. One by one, he spoke them, each a wound reopened, each a soul remembered. Mothers wept, fathers bowed their heads. No one left that church unchanged. When the reading ended, a vow passed through the crowd, soft at first, then stronger, like wind gathering in the pines. Never again. Never again would silence be the price of safety. Never again would they look away. Outside, the freed women huddled near the fire, blankets over their shoulders. Some clung to family, others had no one left. Clara moved among them, kneeling, listening, touching their hands. She had no sermon to offer, only understanding. Her voice was steady, her presence gentle. She helped them find places to sleep, warm meals, quiet corners, to breathe in peace again. When one girl began to sob uncontrollably, Clara drew her close and whispered, "You're safe now. You made it home." The words trembled, but they held. For the first time since her mother's death, Clara spoke not from grief, but from strength. Nathaniel stood a little apart, watching her. His shoulder was bandaged, his face shadowed by fatigue. But in his eyes was something new, calm, almost pride. He had seen her walk through fire and come out unbroken. As townsfolk passed, they nodded to him, some hesitantly, others with quiet respect. The same men who once crossed the street to avoid an Apache now clasped his hand in thanks. No one said it aloud, but everyone knew without Nathaniel Greyhawk, none of them would be standing there. Later, when the crowd thinned and the lanterns dimmed, Clara approached him by the steps of the church. "They see you now," she said softly. He shook his head. "They see what courage looks like, and it wasn't mine alone." Clara smiled faintly. "Maybe not. But you carried it when I couldn't." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of smoke and pine. Above them, the stars burned clean against the black sky. Carrick would be sent east to stand trial, though neither of them trusted the courts to deliver justice. But they both knew one thing: the town had changed. Fear had lost its grip. Clara looked toward the horizon, where dawn would come again soon. "You think peace will last?" she asked. Nathaniel's gaze followed hers. "Peace doesn't last," he said. "But people can." She turned to him, eyes glimmering in the firelight. "Then let's make sure they do." And for the first time, he allowed himself to smile. A small, quiet thing, but real. Around them, the town breathed again. Broken, battered, but alive. And in that fragile, flickering light, the seeds of something greater began to take root: healing, hope, and the quiet promise of love born not from need, but from choice. Spring returned slowly to the valley. The snow melted from the hillsides, and the earth, once cold and silent, breathed again. Clara's homestead bloomed with color. Rows of beans climbed new stakes, and wildflowers spread where ashes had fallen. Laughter drifted through the yard, children's laughter, bright and unafraid. Some were the rescued girls, younger kin. Others, orphans, who had found a home beneath her roof. Nathaniel worked beside her, rebuilding fences, carving benches, mending what winter and sorrow had broken. The townsfolk passed by often now, offering help, sharing food, greeting him by name. The man who had once lived in solitude was no longer a shadow in the mountains. He had become part of the valley's heartbeat. At dusk, Clara would sit on the porch, shawl around her shoulders, watching the sun set over the ridges. Nathaniel would join her in the quiet, his hands still rough from work, his heart finally at peace. One evening, they climbed the ridge together. Below them, the town glowed with lamplight, alive again. The wind brushed soft through the pines as Nathaniel looked out across the valley. "Dreams are not chains," he whispered. "They are doors." And we walked through together. Clara smiled, resting her head against him. The world that had once stolen everything from them had given something back, something steady, something true. And as the stars rose over the reborn town, the story that began with a knock at midnight found its dawn at last. Would you have opened the door to a stranger that night, or walked away from the very thing that might have been your destiny? Share your thoughts below in the comments. And if this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Eagle Eye Apache so we can keep bringing you more stories of courage, hope, and love born on the wild frontier.